Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the second budget open house presentation as part of this year's 5-year financial plan public consultation process. I will take a few minutes to run through a slideshow I prepared that provides some pretty detailed information about the 5-year plan. And if there are any questions, please feel free to interrupt me or save them for the end. It's a very open format. It's an informal format. So if you do have questions or need additional clarification on any of the points, I'm happy to go and continue the discussion in any direction that anybody wants to take it. So I'll just start with the presentation and then we can go from there and see if there's additional questions or lines of discussion. Can you just confirm that you've got my screen there, everyone?
Yeah, looks good.
Thank you. Okay, so welcome to the budget open house presentation for March 30th. The finance plan has been built with some underlying assumptions, first of all, based on inflation. We do believe that the inflationary pressures are going to stick around for quite some time. So there has been a provision for salaries and benefits. We've included it at 4% for the first year and increased those expenditures and the rest of the operating expenditures by 3% in each of the years 2024 through 2027. Another underlying assumption is that interest rates, along with inflation, will remain high. The same point, I like to play it conservatively. So I've estimated interest rates to be remaining between 3% and 4% throughout the planning period. That's good for us while we have savings because it means it's an increase to our investment revenue. It's bad for us for the cost of borrowing on the fire truck loan. There's about $567,000 outstanding and it's a variable rate. It floats with interest, so it goes up and down based on the interest rate. That should be repaid within 4 years from now. The financial plan has some underlying assumptions with regards to population growth. So I think most people are aware that population growth really exploded in the last few years, with the pandemic, with a great increase in the amount of people who moved to Bowen in the last 5 years or so. The census data is taken every 5 years. It was taken in 2016, it was taken in 2021, and it'll be taken again in 2026. Now, this is important for us because it has implications for the funding of police services in the municipality. So we have made an assumption that significant increase in population growth will be the ceiling, that we won't exceed 3.1% per year, so that by 2026, our population will remain under 5,000 people. And the implications with regards to police funding, of course, are that as communities grow over 5,000, a larger share of the costs for police services are downloaded to the municipal level. So at the moment, we fund about 30% of our policing costs. Once we go over that population threshold of 5,000, we can expect to have to pay about 70% of our policing costs. So it is something we're planning for, something that we're considering, but we don't anticipate crossing that threshold until the 2031 census. So it gives us some time. The year-over-year property tax revenue requirement has been established at 13.3% increase for 2023 over what was collected in 2022. And then there are additional increases each year going forward. In 2024, we believe the increase to be approximately 5.8%. And you can see that jump again is resulting from the increase of the annual contribution, the municipal contribution to the multi-use path construction. It'll need to be about $200,000. And again, an increase in 2026. It jumps up again to 6.8%. And that's where you see the impact of additional debt servicing from borrowing for the potential of the capital project that has been identified by staff, the need to improve our works yard. The property tax ratio, we discussed the property tax ratio with council on the 20th of March. The direction to staff there was that council will not consider changes to the property tax ratio for either the business class or the light industrial class or recreational properties, but they may consider changes to the class 2 utility properties for 2023. So I will be bringing back some options for council to consider with regards to the property tax ratio for the April 11th council meeting. The year-over-year property tax requirement, what that means for people who have an average house value for 2023, we estimate at almost 1.5 million, and a 13.3% tax increase would look approximately $347 per year per property. Of course, we also need to factor in the impact of non-market change, and that's described as the year-over-year change in the assessment roll that comes from things not related to market changes. So for the value of new construction, you know, the value of the assessment roll will grow for all of the new construction that happens in year to year, or new subdivisions. When new properties are created through subdivision, there's tax value that was not present on the roll in the prior year. So every time that roll grows, effectively what that does is reduce the effective tax rate for the residents based on the changes in the roll from one year to the next. So the impacts on the market versus non-market change this year, it looks like we have about $25.7 million of additional value that will be taxable this year it didn't exist on the roll last year. So that effectively will reduce the impact of the 13.3% tax increase. What that will do, it will lessen the impact of that tax increase, and it will feel more like a 12.5% tax increase when we factor that in. So if we look at a 12.5% effective rate, what that means is that the average homeowner can expect to pay approximately $327 for their property in 2023. A couple more assumptions included in the financial plan are that the grant application for the community center, the cultural spaces program, we've applied for a $732,000 grant to fund specialized arts and cultural equipment in that space. So we're assuming that that grant program is going to be successful. We're also assuming that the fundraising campaign will be successful, and that that fundraising campaign will result in a minimum of $936,000 in donation revenue. Now, of course, those two revenue sources are large, they're significant, and they would be impactful if they weren't received. So we do have a plan B. We have a contingency funding plan for the community center if indeed those fundraising and those grant applications are not successful. So council has two options in front of them. They can consider additional debt financing through the Municipal Finance Authority. That's like the law, that's like the finance bank for the municipality, for all municipalities in BC. We do all of our borrowing through there. So there is an option to go back to them to arrange for additional short-term 5-year financing to fill that fundraising gap. Or council could possibly access the new Growing Communities Fund grant. So at the end of February, the province announced that there was a significant $5 billion surplus in the province's budget this year. And as a means to help support municipalities with the costs of maintaining and building infrastructure with the high rate of growth that many of the cities have seen this year, the province has provided every municipality in BC with additional grant funding. So Bowen Island received $2.287 million, and that has been, for the time being, has been set aside. I am recommending to council that that money just be set aside until we find out what the results of the fundraising and the grant applications are before any commitments are made with respect to that grant money. It's got to be put in a reserve fund, and that means that it'll have to be clearly noted in the budget what the uses of that fund are. So for the time being, I'm just recommending to council to hang on to that money, and when we know what those the results of that fundraising and the grant application are, then there can be a decision as to how to spend it at that time, and we can do a budget bylaw amendment to record those council decisions at that time. So there's no rush, and there should be no pressure on council to make spending decisions before that May 15th budget deadline. Another underlying assumption with regards to the community center is that it will be open to the public come the mid-October or so of this year. And we do expect that the community center is going to require additional staffing. So for this year, we have added an additional 1.0 FTE for a facility manager position, and we've added 1.75 custodial staffing positions. So overall, we think the full year impact of the additional staffing will be 2.75. And then we've included a prorated share of that based on a July 1st start for the facility manager position in 2023. We believe that we'll need that position in order to help open the community center. There's building systems that need to be commissioned, and documentation about how systems operating and maintenance plans, things like that. We're going to need that support. So we have made the assumption that that position will be hired halfway through the year to be on site to help us open the building. And then the custodial staffing would not really need to be in place until such time as the building is open and operational. So overall changes to the FTE complement, then they are in change from last year is 2.25 positions, and that's down half an FTE because we did not replace the 0.5 FTE bylaw manager position, and we've taken another FTE from the parks coordinator position, and we are suggesting that that should be reallocated to be used in administration in HR. We've really increased our need for HR support, and the workload on that position should really be increased from a 0.5 FTE to a 1.0 FTE. With the growth budgeted in operating expenses from over the course of the planning period, we're looking at a 12.5% increase over the 5-year period. And one of our most significant increases in costs showing up in the 2023 budget is the increase in debt service. And you can see approximately 50% of the overall 13.3 tax increase is actually resulting from the full impact now that we have the debt from the fire hall, 3 million from the fire hall and 4 million from the community center. We're carrying those debts in full effective 2023. So the cost to service those are almost $450,000 a year of new revenue required to service those debts. So if you look at the overall change in annual tax, the $347 increase in taxes, about 177 of that is attributable to our new debt servicing costs. We have some capital expenditures that have been included in the budget. You can see in 2023, the significant amount of construction costs. Of course, that's relating to the community center. And then again in 2025, there is potentially a large additional capital project to be started, and that is relating to the workshard. Over the course of the other years, we've kind of pegged it at about $2 or $2.5 million a year in capital. We have had some meetings with council to sort of discuss that and just see if get some feedback to see if that's the right amount, or should we really be budgeting for additional capital expenditures, given the fact that we know there are a lot of liabilities coming at us from infrastructure renewal and replacement that we will need to fund in the coming years. So the budget as it stands now is providing for an annual funding, kind of like an envelope funding allowance for annual renewal to our capital projects. So the fire department has an annual requirement to replace and purchase new equipment and new turnout gear, that kind of stuff. We know that we have an annual requirement to update and replace laptops and technology. Trails and beach access requires funding each year to replace stairwells and trails and bridges, that kind of stuff. Mobile equipment absolutely needs an investment year after year. And we've sort of pegged the annual roads and infrastructure budget at somewhere between $1 million growing to 1.3 million in the 5th year of the budget. So the budget provides sort of a baseline level of annual funding for those ongoing needs for repair and renewal. And then we've got some kind of one-off projects included in the capital budget. So for example, this year, not this year, in 2025, there's a big line item there. That's the $3.5 million that has been identified as a potential placeholder cost for the works yard renewal and reconstruction project. $395,000 has been established as the cost to replace a very aging fire truck. I did a little dive on our fire truck equipment list, and it was interesting to me because the age of our trucks was a lot older than I had kind of first thought. So I got the list. We have that new large fire truck that we replaced last year in 2022. And yeah, you can see some of them are definitely halfway through age or really at the end of their life. There is a requirement to maintain a specific level of fire underwriter survey protection. There's not a requirement to do it, but if your community wants to maintain that level of fire underwriter survey protection, then I believe that there's a requirement to ensure that all of your trucks are less than 25 years old. So just looking at this little chart here, it shows that about half of them are older and a couple of them are certainly halfway through their lifespan. So we definitely need to look at how we're going to fund and make sure that we have adequate money in place to replace those next pieces of equipment on the list when they come up for replacement. Multi-use path has been provided funding for in each of the 5 years of the plan. It's about a $715,000 contribution each year, or a little bit more where we have funds on hand or been awarded grant funding to help offset the costs. So pretty much the plan includes an annual contribution of about $200,000 of municipal funds and about $500,000 of grant funds in each of the 5 years. Now the grant funding is confirmed for 2023. The grant funding is confirmed for 2024, but for 2025, 2026, and 2027, those are really just placeholders. We don't have confirmed grants at this point, but we have budgeted for the project on the assumption that we'll get those grants. If we don't actually get those grants, then we're going to have to come up with an additional method to find the $500,000 contribution in each of the 3 years. We've put the on-island composting project back into the plan starting in 2023. Last year it was taken out because it was deemed too expensive. We didn't have adequate funding in our budget anywhere. We would have had to borrow additional funds to come up with our share. We have been awarded a $1.5 million grant. Sorry, a $1.1 million grant, which would fund a $1.5 million project. We have considered applying to utilize a different technology, a less expensive technology. that doesn't require three-phase power. It's also provided by a supplier that is quite local. So in the event that we need to find or source replacement parts or have additional technical support, that supplier is they're located in Bainbridge Island, Washington. So they're very close, as opposed to the original plan, which was proposing that we acquire the equipment from a producer in New Zealand, which, given the impacts of pandemic and supply chain issues, we felt that was quite a risk. So we made some decisions to consider an alternative technology that may be more suited to us here on Bowen Island. So that project is still in. Carla, the manager of Environment and Parks, is working with me to develop a new operating plan. So we will be bringing that back to the Finance Committee and then to Council for consideration. And if it is in fact deemed that that's a viable financial operating plan, then we can go ahead with that project. So it's just in here as a placeholder. It does, we understand that it requires a final approval by Council to give the go-ahead to go with it or not. But yeah, we do have some alternative sources of funding, some climate action grant money that we could identify to use to help with our contribution, but we aren't looking to borrow any additional money to put into that project. So stay tuned. We will come back with more information on the on-island composting. There are a lot of additional capital expenditures that aren't included in this budget. And we had a committee of the whole meeting held on March 27th. The director of engineering came to Council and he identified several other capital projects of high priority that are not actually included in this plan as presented. He talked a bit about renewal work that was needed on Snug Cove Dock North and South. He talked about Carter Road Bridge and the need to replace that piece of infrastructure, as well as some significant geotechnical work needed up on Woods Road. So there are lots of things out there and they are going to cost money. The recommendation or the question in front of Council now is, should we actually increase the property tax revenue requirement for years 2024 through 2027? Of course, completion of our asset management plan is going to confirm the real size of the infrastructure funding gap once we've completed that. And we believe that it would be very prudent for Council to consider additional contributions to reserve funds in preparation for the development of the funding plan to address the real infrastructure gap. So at the upcoming Council meeting in April 11th, staff will provide options for Council to consider additional property tax increases in the last 4 years of the plan, and that would provide for additional contributions to reserve funds, strictly just to support the infrastructure replacement and renewal. As the plan is now, there are amounts that are budgeted to the Capital Renewal and Replacement Fund, the Roads and Infrastructure Fund, and the Equipment Reserve. Those are our three significant ones that are really focusing on dedicated, increasing annual contributions to them. We are proposing that we set up a new statutory reserve in 2024, and that's called the Police Funding Reserve. And as I mentioned earlier about the future, we know that we're going to be faced with additional costs to provide policing services in our community. I am proposing now that that Council start to consider and consider the financial impacts of that on our community and start setting money away now and increasing it each year a little bit to kind of get us to that point where when we do eventually go over that 5,000 population threshold, it's not going to be such a shock. It's going to be expected, it's going to be planned for, and we will be at that, we will have taxation at that level, which will enable us to continue to support policing services in the community. In 2023, there is proposed a one-time $500,000 contribution to the Civic Facilities Reserve Fund. It was not a one-time, we made it in 2022 as well. And this was done to set aside money for community center construction. I'm proposing that council make that $500,000 contribution as part of the construction budget this year again. And we also did receive earlier in January, we received a $128,000 amenity contribution from a developer. So overall, from this year's budget, am proposing that 628 go into that community facilities reserve to fund construction for community center. Of course, we do have this newly announced grant fund as well from the provincial government, and I am recommending, as I said earlier, for council to just sock that away and just hang on to it until the funding for the community center is confirmed and finalized. That will kind of over the 5-year plan. It does mean that there will be we can see what the kind of cumulative changes are in the ending balances of statutory reserves under this plan. I did adjust it to remove the unspent growing communities fund of 2.287. While we're getting it, I don't believe that we're going to be hanging on to it for all that long. So I made an adjustment to back that out. What we want to see over time with good financial planning is we want to see the difference between what we put in each year and what we take out each year. We want to see that increase. We want that space between the two lines. The blue line is how much we're putting in, and the green line is how much we're taking out. So over time, in order to build those reserves, we're going to really need to make a dedicated effort to ensure that what goes in doesn't come right out again, but we leave it in there to grow and to provide a supporting fund to invest and replace and renew our roads assets, our equipment assets, all of those things that support infrastructure on Bowen Island. We do have a legally established debt borrowing liability servicing limit. It is established by the province, and it is equal to about 25% of our own generated revenues. So at the moment, with the existing debt that we have, we spend, and this is debt that is taken out on behalf of water systems or utility systems, as well as for the general fund. Overall, with all of our water and general fund debt, we spend about $916,000 per year on interest and principal payments, and that represents about 33% of our liability servicing limit. There are potential new near-term debts that we could be expected to undertake. One, of course, is the Blue Water 3.1 million. One is potentially there for Eagle Cliff to undertake a water capital project in that district. And as well, if that Workshard project goes ahead at 3.5 million, that could all add additional debt servicing costs to the annual municipal budget. With those 3 projects added, we could expect to be at approximately 50% of our annual liability servicing limit estimate. And then we also still need to consider additional debt that may need to be taken on in the long term. So, for example, there are still phases of an Eagle Cliff water project that could be considered. Again, phase 4 of the Blue Water project to be considered, and as well as expansion, the phase 2 expansion of the wastewater treatment plant. All of those projects could potentially add up to another 10 million of annual debt that would require approximately 560,000 of additional operating revenue to service. And in the event that those additional debts were assumed, we would be looking at an annual debt servicing limit of approximately 63% of our annual limit. So there is quite a bit of potential borrowing out there in the future that is all going to impact liability servicing limit estimates for many years to come. There's a couple of transfers included in this budget, which should be brought to your attention. One is there's additional final funding to complete the wastewater treatment plant upgrades. The Director of Engineering brought a report to council in June of last year to get approval to go ahead with the project, and identified at that time that there was still 100,000 or 150,000 of additional costs still to be funded. And at that time, council directed me to come back once the final expenses were known and recommend a funding plan for that. So I have included in this budget the potential to access accumulated surplus of up to $100,000 in order to fund the final expenditures related to the wastewater treatment plant upgrade. As well, out to the library fund. So the library board presented to council earlier in March. They put a request to council to fund their operations this year for $420,000. It's up significantly over last year, but the librarian, the chief librarian at that time, did identify that there was some underlying erroneous assumptions in the budgeting process last year that were not picked up. And I think what happened during the course of the year, it became evident that if there was no changes or change of direction made during the year, that they would have ended up significantly over budget. But between Chief Librarian Tina and myself, we were able to kind of step in and suggest deferral of some purchases or some initiatives that just did not go forward. So luckily the library budget came in under budget, and they were fine. But their request to the council this year now it seems to be almost a 2-year jump in the request, but that is in respect of correcting for that underlying budget estimate. So where we're at in the development process for the financial plan, March 30th, today is the second Zoom meeting that we're holding to provide public budget information. From here, we will go to council on April 11th, and we will be providing council with the results of the public engagement process. Providing council with a recommendation or some options to consider for any changes that council would like to see with the property tax ratio. We'll provide some options for council to consider any changes to the years 2024 to 2027 with regards to contribution to reserve funds. And I'll also update council on the results of the water and sewer system budget meetings. They are going on at the moment. Right now, we've had, I think, 3 of them, and we have 5 more to go. So so I'll be providing a lot of information to council at the April 11th meeting, and looking for direction from council to draft the 5-year financial plan bylaw, which I expect will come back to council at the April 24th meeting for 3 readings for the financial plan and the annual tax rate bylaw, and then looking for council to adopt the financial plan at the May 8th council meeting. There is a statutory requirement that it be adopted before May 15th. So we're hoping to have that done by May 8th this year. Utility budget meetings, and the public consultation period. We're still taking public consultation. Please send an email to the budget@bimbc email address, or you can always email direct to Mayor and Council, and we will consolidate all of that and present it to Mayor and Council at April 11th. So I think that's it for me. And if there were any questions, I'm happy to address those.
Well done.
Mm-hmm.
You
have to go home early.
I don't see any questions in the participants panel. So I think if there's no questions from the members here, I think we'll just wrap it up.
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, Kristen.